Hello and welcome to another episode of Seedling Sessions. Today we're speaking to Casey Woodward of AgriSound. Hi Casey, how are you doing?
Hey Tom, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. So really excited to have you on the podcast. I've been following AgriSound for some time now and I've been really looking forward to getting the opportunity to have a chat to you about what you're doing and also the future plans for the business. But just for listeners of the podcast, would you mind doing a little introduction about yourself, AgriSound, and a little bit maybe about your mission?
Yeah, definitely. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Casey. I've been in the agri-tech space now for the last 5 years or so, working in livestock innovations, and then over the last couple of years set up a company called AgriSound, which aims to use low-cost listening technology to understand insect biodiversity in the field and help farmers and growers to really be able to target interventions to protect pollinators where needed.
So when you say, so obviously the listening device themselves are quite low cost. Two things that would be interesting to me is one, kind of, what's the recommendation for a producer or whoever the customers they are using? Kind of, what are the number of devices per hectare are they needed to use? And do you expect that to be across kind of the whole farm? What's the...
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's the question we get asked the most, probably. And I think it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. So if you're an apple grower and you've got, hundreds of hectares of orchards, you might want to optimize your pollination in those orchards to make sure you get the best fruit yields and the best fruit quality. And we know that suboptimal pollination costs around £5,000 per hectare here in the UK. So it's pretty big challenge that growers are facing. So we would recommend kind of 2 to 4 devices per hectare. Mm-hmm. In that case, it would be sort of around about a couple of £100. And then, but conversely, if you were an arable grower or a dairy farmer and you wanted to make sure that you was protecting pollinators, you might want to monitor your hedgerows, or you might want to look at any forms of bee habitat that you have on your farm was operating in the best possible way, or you're getting the most return for the investment that you've made, in which case it might be a much smaller number of devices placed in those areas, and you're just tracking very small areas rather than monitoring the whole field, in which case it might only be a handful of devices in that case. So it really depends on the question you're trying to answer.
Yeah, and I'm assuming that the kind of the meat of the innovation, I mean, obviously, even with low cost listening devices, as we all know, once you get them out into an agricultural setting, I'm sure there was some work required to make them robust enough. But my assumption is that the real meat of the innovation is in the algorithmic and data processing.
Absolutely. So we're using some standard components. We've built our own hardware, but ultimately it's effectively a low-cost Alexa that you might have in your house. Yep. Applied in your garden or field. So it's a series of microphones with some environmental sensors. So the idea being that we can use bioacoustic algorithms, so particular algorithms which interpret that sound information to tell us what type of insect is present and the abundance of that insect, alongside some of the factors that might be contributing to why your pollinator levels are high or low. If the temperature is very high or humidity is very high, that might change. So it's a case of trying to listen out to the sounds of those insects, but also being able to interpret that sound file in a very scalable way, which means that we don't need very high-powered computing resource, or we don't need to get the device confounded by lots of different background noises and try to strip all of that out. So yeah, you're right. The algorithms that we've developed really are the core IP, as it were, of the devices.
That's interesting. And so obviously you mentioned earlier, not only working across a number of different kind of agricultural sectors, but also, what people are trying to achieve. And I think one of the things that we see a lot in ag tech, particularly in sort of the more cutting edge stuff, is a lot of different ways of capturing data, but then sometimes there's a bit of a gap between then giving the end users actionable insights. And it sounds like that's something you've already spent a lot of time thinking about, how to take all of this data and actually then, depending on the particular use case, deliver easy and actionable insights. It'd be interesting to hear a bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we spent a lot of time talking to growers to kind of look at what they were doing around insect biodiversity monitoring as is, and then what would they want from an automated solution. So we know that most growers tend to rely on manual observations. They're bringing in volunteers or consultants or ecologists to come out and stand on the farm for a few days to really understand kind of what's going on. And clearly that's fraught with challenges. If the day's a bit overcast or weather's poor or too windy, that can really skew the results. And then it means you've then got to bring someone back out and incur more costs. So it's a problem. And what ultimately growers want to know is kind of, where are the black spots on the farm? Do I have sufficient pollinator coverage? Yes or no? Very binary. And if no, kind of where are those black spots? And then what can we do to plug those gaps? So what we've done is we've developed a very simple user interface, which ultimately revolves around a heat map, which shows kind of where the devices are, what's the activity happening in those areas. And therefore, if you have got an area which has some form of deficit, then we give some very high level recommendations around, in short term being to move managed pollinators there, so either a honeybee hive or bumblebee box, but longer term look at kind of how can we use more sustainable interventions like sowing wildflower seeds, creating new bee habitat to create local native pollinator communities that can ultimately deliver all of the good stuff in terms of the precision pollination that's required, but also in a way that's kind of environmentally and economically viable and sustainable.
Great. So in essence, essentially, you've got kind of 24/7 monitoring, heat mapping and recommendations, which you can then work with the grower, their agronomist, another company who can provide pollinators and advice on. Yeah,
that was some of the feedback we had quite clearly was from the grower's perspective. They were already engaging an agronomist, and they didn't see it as our job to be telling them what to do on the farm. And we've taken that to heart. And we tell growers that we're engaging with now that we're a technology company. We're not agronomists. We'll show you where those deficit zones are, but ultimately it's your decision on how you want to deal with that. And if you want to make any recommendations at all, if you want to make any interventions at all, then that's completely up to them, and they can deal with that as they see fit.
And so I don't want to put you on the spot at all, but have you got any kind of particular success stories that you'd want to talk about publicly?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We're really proud to say that our first big project is kicking off next month with Innocent Drinks. So Innocent Drinks are obviously one of the biggest smoothie brands and part of the Coca-Cola group. And they came to us recognizing that there was a problem around getting enough pollinators across all of their fruit production estates in Southern Europe. And so we're working with them on a pilot project now to deploy some of our devices onto some of their apple orchards to help them evaluate different types of interventions that they're going to apply to, remediate low pollinator levels, but also then use this as a case study to then really get this technology used across their wider supply chain, which we're really, really excited by, actually. And I think, as a company that's only been going just over 2 years now, I think the fact we're working with such impressive brands like Innocent Drinks is something that we're really, really proud of, actually.
Yeah, it's very, very impressive. But I think it obviously speaks to the value of the mission and the product and the growing trend towards sustainable and regenerative. What is interesting to me is that, I've spoken to a number of ag-tech companies over the last year who, interestingly, have started to work more and more with processors and food brands. And what you're seeing is, personally, I think what you're seeing is a consumer push towards more regenerative and sustainable products, which is that they're thereby getting some of the more progressive food brands. And it's obviously always been one of those. I think they just got their B Corp status. Looking at ways that they can work further down the food chain and pre-farm gate, and it's really encouraging for me that we're starting to see the whole food value chain working together towards these kind of admirable goals.
Absolutely. I think what's great for us is that consumers are really vocal about protecting pollinators. Everyone knows that bees are dying out, and that presents a really big problem. And I think, what's great is that the consumer is now making their voice really clearly heard, and they're supporting the brands which are doing their part to protect bees and protect biodiversity. And from our perspective, obviously, we're really lucky that we're supporting that agenda, and we've got brands that want to work with us to help them to achieve that and tell consumers a really positive story about what they're doing to help protect the bees and other pollinators.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. And I guess a nice place to move on is, like, I know you've got some pretty ambitious goals. It'd be great to hear about some of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're really going for the stars, Tom. I mean, we want to create the world's largest insect biodiversity database. And the way we want to do that is to deploy a network of our listening devices across the globe. We're aiming at our first 1 million devices over the next few years, and then, onwards and upwards from there, really. And what that will enable us to do is really take this big problem of the loss of biodiversity and the loss of pollinators in particular, but address it at a hyper-local level. That's always the problem. We know that climate change is a big issue, just taking that as an example, but when we talk about how we solve it, we often get sort of scared by the big actions that are required, whereas what we're trying to do is help growers and farmers, and even broader than that, into gardeners and construction companies and so on, to really help them take action at a really local level that can just start to create more areas where bees can be protected and native bees can thrive. And from that, we expect to see, the outputs being greater than the sum of the parts, as it were.
Yeah. So obviously you're a UK company. What does the mapping of your kind of global geographic rollout look like? I'm assuming you've already started a bit, and if you've got any particular, if there's any listeners, for example, who might be able to help out with that.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's still early days for us. The vast majority of our devices are forecast to go out into the UK over the next 12 months. Mm-hmm. But we're certainly not closed off to discussions with people in other countries. We've been talking to plenty of people in New Zealand and in Australia around some of their almond plantations and fresh produce in those markets. We've been talking to people in the States as well, particularly around kind of big greenhouses and making sure that we can optimize pollination in controlled settings as well as in outdoor settings. And the imperative there is very strong because it's a very large commercial cost. Buying in pollinators is expensive ultimately, and so everyone wants to make sure they get enough bang for their buck, as it were. So for us, it's a case of, I think we're staying close to home for the time being to make sure we've got the evidence base that really shows how the technology works and how much impact it can ultimately have. And then I think from there we'll then start to roll that out. But no, we're really excited. And I think this is just the tip of the iceberg for AgriSound and what we're going to achieve over the next few years.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it makes real sense to focus on pollinators and focus on a single market and really be able to demonstrate, impact case studies on that. I've got a real passion for regenerative systems, particularly in agriculture, obviously. And, of that, biodiversity is a major kind of pillar for that. And interestingly, obviously, around the carbon side, we've seen a huge growth around within ecosystem services, as much as a strange phrasing. Carbon's been the big one up until now, and I don't think we've seen the peak of carbon ecosystem services. One of the next big ones, water infiltration is of course one, but another big one is biodiversity, and that's not necessarily just going to be around pollinators, which I appreciate are a big indicator of that. So is there in the longer term the potential for your devices to also listen out for a wider range of biodiversity?
Absolutely, yeah. So I think we know that we completely agree. Pollinators are just the start. and they are really important indicator species around the health of an ecosystem. But actually, we can use our technology to monitor things like pests as well, and make sure we're helping growers to use integrated pest management and reduce pesticide application where necessary. And so we've already started that work. We've had a proof of concept project recently looking at how we can listen out for the codling moth, which is a really important economic pest of apple orchards. And so we definitely want to look at that and expand that library of algorithms present to be able to recognise more pests as well as more beneficial insects as well. But I think there's no reason why the technology can't be used more broadly than that either. So if we wanted to use the device to monitor birds in the environment, we absolutely could do that. If we wanted to monitor small mammals, we absolutely could do that as well. Anything that makes a noise, we can pick up and distinguish that noise by isolating the kind of the key acoustic features against the background noise. So if people have got interesting ideas of other use cases, then we'd be absolutely delighted to hear that and be open to working with anyone to take the device to the next level.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's obviously you said working outside of agriculture, and you mentioned construction, and I wonder if there's a pitch that needs to be made to the HS2, because I know that I'm aware that for that build, the working out the impact on biodiversity, across that construction is going to be a big thing. Probably worth reaching out.
Yeah, definitely. We are talking to quite a few big infrastructure projects kind of teams at the moment to look at how the technology can be used to help provide an indication of what's happening to that environment. And as you'll know, Tom, the UK is under the new environmental bill, all of these projects have to show a biodiversity net gain of over 10%. So it's quite significant. And I think what we can do is highlight the areas where a landscape might be struggling, and then suggest some interventions that can help developers get over that threshold. But then 10% should be the minimum. We could hopefully way exceed that as well. And we know that if you've got bees on a site, you'll then start getting pollination of hedgerows that provide berries for birds, and then the whole ecosystem benefits. So it's we think there's loads of great stuff that we can do by protecting pollinators, and guys absolutely need to listen to us.
I think what's so exciting about a tech development like this is one of the core principles around trying to make regressions and sustainability and regeneration is this idea of measure to manage. And if you can't benchmark where you are and where you're going under all of these different things, then it's impossible for it to be regulated, one for growers or construction people to understand where they're going right, where they're going wrong, where they should be focusing. And so something a tech solution like this, which the core is a kind of measurement and management tool, is so exciting and so needed. Well, look, it's been really, really interesting getting a catch up on the project. I mean, it's incredible to think you've only been going just under 2 years and what you've achieved so far. Is there anything else that you'd like to kind of put out there to listeners, or any kind of collaboration requests that we might be able to help you with?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think for us, we're a small company, and we recognise our limitations. In terms of we can't achieve everything alone, and so collaboration is really important to us. And I think we definitely see ourselves as being a partner who can bring biodiversity elements to projects, particularly bigger projects looking at regen farming as a concept, or more kind of environmentally sustainable forms of crop production, or even beyond that. So I think if my message would be, if there were companies out there that were interested in looking at biodiversity, and they wanted to work with a partner that was used to working in partnerships, very collaborative, then definitely reach out, get in touch, and we'd be delighted to grab a virtual coffee and have a chat, if nothing else.
Oh, amazing. Well, we are looking at doing a regen-focused event at the end of March, and where we're looking to bring technologists, producers, farmers, etc., together to talk about this. And I think it'd be really great to potentially have you guys at that.
I'll sign us up. Sounds brilliant.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, look, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day. I know you must be incredibly busy as a startup. But it's been a really enjoyable conversation, and I'm really looking forward to following up and seeing how things go over the coming months.
Brilliant. Cheers, Tom. Great to chat.
Not at all.